So this is going to be a video describing this slightly tricky spec point. Describe how genetic analysis has led to the suggestion of 3 domains rather than 5 kingdoms classification method, which sounds far more complicated than it is, but it is definitely something that needs explaining. So we should be at this point where effectively we can classify life, anything in life, into one of these 5 kingdoms, where Monera is another word for bacteria or prokaryotes. Okay, so these are your bacteria. They don't have a nucleus. Is the main thing that will classify them over here. Some have flagella, some have chloroplasts, but these are effectively your bacteria. You've got your protists, also known as your protozoas, which are sort of the dustbin of evolutionary life. If it's got a nucleus and it doesn't fit with the other 3, fungi, plants, animals, then it goes in here. And then you've got fungi, mushrooms, molds, yeasts, plants, self-explanatory, and animals, self-explanatory. And what you need to know is that actually this system broke down in the 1970s. And the reason for this is because they discovered a new sort of, I'm going to put it as a type of bacteria now, and I'll explain that to you in a second. So the best way to explain this is actually get you to think about it. So if I showed you these photos and said to you, can you tell me whether these are eukaryotes or prokaryotes that you're looking at? Hopefully what you would do is, just by looking at them and by their physical appearance, you would go, okay, this one might be prokaryotic, this one is probably eukaryotic, this one is prokaryotic, looks like bacteria, that's prokaryotic, I can't see a nucleus on this electron micrograph, that's a sperm, so that's eukaryotic. These are tiny little blobs that don't look like they've got nuclei, so I'll say they're prokaryotic. That's probably prokaryotic as well for the same reason. That's an egg cell, so that's eukaryotic. This is prokaryotic, it doesn't look like it's got a nucleus to me. Some people could say that's a worm or eukaryotic. It is actually a prokaryote, but that's not the point I'm trying to make. These are probably prokaryotes, because that's a bacteria. Those are prokaryotes, again, look like little bacteria. That's a leaf, so that's a eukaryote, and that's actually smooth muscle, so that's eukaryotic. And this is effectively what happened. This is how we used to classify things back in the 1970s. And whilst doing that, you've made a mistake, and you've made the mistake that the whole scientific community did, which is actually these things that look like bacteria aren't super like bacteria when you dig a little deeper. So these two are this final kingdom that you need to know about, or this final domain, I should say, which I'll explain in a second, which are your archaea. And why do we have archaea? Why does this come in? Why are we learning about this? What's different about them? They look like bacteria. And the answer is, you don't need to know any of this, but it makes sense to understand it and just go a little bit deeper. In terms of their genetics, how they actually do making proteins, transcription, translation, that stuff we learned about at the start of the year, is hugely different. So archaea have multiple RNA polymerases. Bacteria only have one, the enzyme that does transcription. Bacterial DNA is not wrapped around proteins, but archaea is. Okay, so actually DNA is wrapped around these little proteins. Archaeal genes actually have non-coding regions within the actual gene, which is very strange, called an intron, whereas bacteria don't. Archaea cell walls are made up of slightly different monomers than bacterial cell walls. And actually what this top bit is saying is they actually have a different ribosome as well. So what I'm saying here is, although they look the same, they are very genetically different. I.e. they do transcription differently, they do translation differently. Their genes actually have little non-coding regions in them, for example. And this basically led to this bloke called Carl Vosser saying that they're so different from bacteria that we can't actually keep them in the same kingdom anymore. To classify them as Monera or bacteria or just prokaryotes is actually wrong, because although they look like them, they're genetically very different. So what they've had to do is they could then go, okay, well the problem is we then can't group them with the eukarya because they haven't got a nucleus, so that's wrong. So what we actually have to go and do is we make this 3rd domain. So actually what you'd have is you'd have 3 domains, where you have archaea as one domain. So this new bacteria that we've been speaking about actually is its own domain, so that's a level above a kingdom. A bacteria as its own, so your prokaryotes, your Monera, make their own domain, and then eukarya would have its own domain as well. So actually the kingdoms do still exist within the eukarya. So you've got your animals, your fungi, your plants, and then basically these are mostly the other protists over here. So you've still got the kingdoms within eukarya, but actually bacteria and archaea are in their own domains above it. It's a very strange way of classifying, and why it's on GCSE is slightly beyond me, but the question they tend to ask about it is give one reason why the three domain classification system was proposed as opposed to the 5 kingdom classification system, and all you have to say is they have got, due to genetic analysis based on DNA or genetics, the DNA of archaea was more similar to eukaryotes, or it was less similar to prokaryotes, so you couldn't group them together anymore. Okay, so in terms of what we're speaking about here, in terms of what Mark's scheme is saying in terms of more similar to eukaryotes, all those examples I showed you, so for example having non-coding regions within genes, having proteins in your DNA or wrapped on your DNA, they're actually more similar to eukaryotes. So everything I spoke about before, but I'm not convinced that's of too much consequence. Okay, so there's your domains versus kingdom classification in a nutshell.